Without notice. Do we have any questions today? Yes, the Leader of the Opposition.
We do, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday in this House, the Prime Minister admitted more Australians would lose their jobs because he's planning to withdraw their JobKeeper wage subsidy in September. How many jobs is he planning to sacrifice to his snapback?
The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition misrepresents. In fact, he is completely wrong about what I said yesterday. I said we're in a recession, and in recession people lose work, Mr Speaker, and it's an awful tragedy for those Australians, Mr Speaker, and that's why the government has put in place record supports through JobKeeper and through JobSeeker and the cash flow allowance, the support that has been put into business lending, Mr Speaker, over $200 billion worth of support. That's what the government has been doing in our record response. And as a result of the interventions that our government has weighed, Mr Speaker, Australia is weathering this economic storm better than almost every other developed country in the world today, Mr Speaker, providing the support that Australians need. And we will continue to provide the support that they need. And the most important thing that this country needs for those jobs is for our economy to grow again, for businesses to move forward again, for our economy to reopen, and for those Australians to find themselves back into those jobs. And that's what our JobMaker plan is about. Our JobMaker plan is not just about the demand support that is occurring right here and right now with the assistance that Australians need, but the important changes that we need to make in so many areas so we grow the economy next year, the year after, over the next 5 years, to take back what has been lost as a result of this COVID-19 crisis. If the Leader of the Opposition wants to tell the Australian people that in a recession there is no hardship, then he is a fool.
The member for REID.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister.
Members on my left. Member for REID has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government's JobMaker plan is guaranteeing the essential services Australians rely on?
Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for REID for her question and her continuing leadership in her own community as she supports Australians, particularly young Australians, Mr Speaker, so impacted by this crisis, and her experience in dealing particularly with young children as well in her professional work before coming into this place is very important in informing the government's policies, particularly around issues like child protection and supporting the mental health challenges that young Australians face. Mr Speaker, it's not just the jobs of Australians that are dependent on us recovering
the Prime Minister just pause for a second? The member for Rankin and the Treasurer have this continual conversation that's very loud, that's preventing the rest of us hearing the answer. If they could just cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It is not just the jobs of Australians that depends on the resurgence of our economy on the other side of the COVID-19 crisis, but it is indeed the services that Australians rely on that are so dependent on the restoration of the Australian economy, which is why the JobMaker plan, Mr Speaker, is so important. We restore the revenues that those essential services rely on, not by higher taxes. We secure that higher revenue, Mr Speaker, by ensuring we get people back into work, that we get investment back into our economy, and we see our economy grow again. That is why our JobMaker plan is about keeping the tax cuts that we have legislated in this place, and remain absolutely committed to keeping those tax cuts to give Australians that continued incentive, Mr Speaker, in the economy. The changes that we need to make to skills working to the states and territories, the changes we need to make in workplace and industrial relations, the changes we need to make to ensure that we deregulate our economy so businesses can invest and employ people and find their way back, the changes that we need to make in infrastructure and increasing our investment, as we spoke of yesterday, some almost $10 billion brought forward in new investment just in the last 8 months alone. And of course, Mr Speaker, there is much more to come in this area as we continue to roll out the JobMaker plan that ensures that we can get that growth that will provide the revenues to support those essential services that we're committed to, such as the $31 billion in extra spending on hospitals, Mr Speaker, in the 5-year agreement signed by all states and territories, secured by the Minister for Health, the delivery of pharmacy services secured by the pharmacy agreement delivered by the Minister for Health, the continued support of the pharmaceutical benefits scheme, Mr Speaker, so some 2,300 new and amended listings already introduced by this government, the record real needs-based funding for our schools, Mr Speaker, that the Minister for Education is delivering, up from $13.8 billion when we came to government, now at $21.8 billion and heading to $32.5 billion under the changes we've made, Mr Speaker, and what we've achieved by putting that funding in place, Mr Speaker, and the $243 million, Mr Speaker, that we've committed to supporting the safety of Indigenous children in this country as well.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The member for Rankin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "The challenge of JobKeeper is that businesses will form views about those employees who they will be able to keep on longer term and those who they will not." End quote. Why won't the Prime Minister just be honest and tell the Australian people how many jobs he will end in September?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, JobKeeper is supporting more than 3 million workers, Mr Speaker. More than 3 million workers, Mr Speaker, across gymnasiums, across
Treasurer will just pause for a
sector.
second. The level of interjections is too high. I'm giving fair warning to everybody. Treasurer can just mute for a second. I'll have no hesitation in lowering the volume through the use of Standing Order 94A. I'm just letting everyone know. The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. The JobKeeper program, the largest such support program in Australia's history, at around $70 billion, supporting more than 3 million workers, is helping to maintain that formal connection between employers and employees, and it's part of a suite of measures that the government has deployed. Some $260 billion, or 13.3% of GDP. The states have put in around $36 billion. We have contributed, in terms of economic support, some $260 billion. Now, Mr Speaker, we have said that when it comes to the future of the JobKeeper program, we will undertake a review the Treasury is currently conducting. But, Mr Speaker, I'm asked about jobs, and I point the member for Rankin to the ABS weekly payroll and jobs data that was out today, and it showed that the total payroll jobs increased by 1% through May, and that payroll jobs worked by females increased by 1.4% through May compared to 0.4% for males, Mr Speaker. And when it talked about younger workers who, like female workers, have been really badly hit by this COVID crisis, it made the point that payroll jobs in this final week of May increased by 2% for those aged under 20 compared to 0.4% for all jobs. Now, Mr Speaker, that's a reflection of the fact that some of those sectors where young people and women are more prominent, and I'm talking about in the hospitality sector and in the retail sector, that they are starting to open up as a result of the success that we have had as a nation in flattening the curve. People are starting to get back to work, and it's the coalition who can be trusted to keep people in jobs and to ensure that this transition to helping the economy get back on its feet will occur.
It's the member for Lyons call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister inform the House how the Morrison and McCormack government's JobMaker plan is creating jobs, building infrastructure and boosting the economy as part of our recovery from COVID-19, including in my electorate of Lyne?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do want to thank the hard-working member for Lyne for his question, Mr Speaker, and he would know Rod Williams, the Deputy Chair of Advanced Gloucester, and I've been speaking with the member for Lyne about the Advanced Gloucester and about the project, the Buckets Way. Now, I know the member for Lyne has long advocated for an upgrade to Buckets Way. Rod Williams had this to say about the project. We're over the moon. There are no losers in this. It'll springboard Gloucester's opportunities, supporting tourism and industry in the region. Now, tourism and industry, I know, are two sectors that the member for Lyne has long championed. He is somebody who understands small business. He understands regional development, and he certainly understands the importance of Bucket Way. It's about 150 kilometres, a rural road connecting Gloucester to Taree and Raymond Terrace. Gloucester, established in the 1850s, population of around 2,400. It's an important dairy and beef community. Mr Speaker, the $25 million federal upgrade to this particular stretch of road under the Roads of Strategic Importance, under the Heavy Vehicle Safety and Productivity program, is going to change the lives of those people in Gloucester. And the member for Lyons knows that. He understands that this is going to provide 240, member for Lyne, 240 jobs through construction. 240 jobs. He understands that construction, which is due to come in coming months, is going to make such a difference for his local area. And he adheres and he agrees with Mr Williams and his summary of that project. And he also understands that through the COVID-19 pandemic, we have the relief and recovery measures in place, the plan, the blueprint, the vision for the future, which is going to help regional communities such as the electorate of Lyne through these difficult times. And they are trying times, and they're certainly trying times for those regional communities such as Gloucester. Now, he also understands that councils such as Dungog, Maitland City, Mid Coast, Port Stephens, Port Macquarie, Hastings are also going to benefit from the local roads and community infrastructure program that we have established, that we have put in place, a doubling of roads to recovery funding for those councils I mentioned, $7.44 million, in addition to $23.09 million under financial assistance grants brought forward. This is going to make such a difference for those regional communities. It's going to enable them to build the roads, it's going to enable them to protect the jobs and the livelihoods of so many in the electorate of Lyne, an electorate which the member so fiercely and proudly represents, has done for some time and will do for some years to come.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I recently met Craig and Tamara, who are beef farmers in Cobargo, whose herd was devastated when bushfire tore through their property. They say they haven't been able to access a bushfire recovery grant. Why is the Prime Minister leaving people like Craig and Tamara behind?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. In relation to primary producer grants in New South Wales, they have been available in 49 local government areas. 2,236 applications have been received and 1,341 grants have been approved, and that is worth some $84.6 million, Mr Speaker. In fact, what has been occurring with the primary producer grants is they've been running ahead of what our estimate has been for the provision of those grants to primary producers. There are certainly eligibility criteria, which I would think that the Leader of the Opposition would think was necessary when you're providing any grants programs. There are eligibility criteria that apply to those grants. But I know that those primary producer grants have been incredibly important to those who have been able to receive them and have been eligible for those grants, because it is assisting them as they're able to restock their properties and deal with the significant damage. It's some $75,000 that those grants apply to. I've seen their benefit firsthand across Australia, including in those communities that the member refers to, but I've also seen how they were applied in earlier times in relation to other disasters, like the floods in North Queensland. So, Mr Speaker, but the Minister for Agriculture has further information that he can provide to assist the member with his inquiry.
The Minister for Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Prime Minister. And I can advise the House that Tamara and Craig, in fact, have received a grant. They received it on the 26th of May. The Leader of the Opposition, in fact, tweeted this on the 27th of May that they didn't receive the grant. Now, this is a very serious issue. A very serious issue that we are playing with
members on my right.
With all due respect,
members on my right.
With all due respect, this is about us working together as a nation. We are making sure that we are working with state agencies who are rolling out these programs, ensuring that we support them. We will not blame the states, we will help them. In fact, we have done so much so that we have put on nearly an additional 30 National Bushfire Recovery Agency staff to get out there, to be boots on the ground and to support the states in rolling out the programs that we are asking them to deliver. And we are happy to work with every level of government to identify anybody that may have been left fall through the cracks. No one will be left behind. This government has made that commitment to every bushfire victim. We will make sure the states and the federal government work together to look after our fellow Australians who went through one of the worst bushfire disasters in our nation's history.
The member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. On Friday, the Minister will address the Press Club on the crucial role of universities in producing job-ready graduates for the COVID-19 recovery. Tertiary admission centres have reported a surge in applications, but some universities do not have places available to meet this demand. Will the Minister consider funding more places for domestic students in areas with skills shortages such as nursing and allied health, for instance in the regional campuses of La Trobe and Charles Sturt universities?
The Minister for Education has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for her question. And the government is already providing additional places for regional and rural universities through our performance-based funding. It's providing 1.3% additional places across the board. We are also providing additional places through our short courses, which have been taken up by regional and rural universities. And as a matter of fact, I want to commend all regional and rural universities who have taken up the government's challenge to adopt the short courses. At the moment, we have 49 providers who are offering 321 courses in those priority areas that the member was talking about. And those priority areas are where we have skill shortages. So when it comes to IT, when it comes to nursing, when it comes to counselling, something which has been incredibly important when it comes to the bushfires, and we saw that we had a shortage of counsellors when it came to the bushfires. When it comes to teachers, in all these areas we've been offering these short courses, and the universities have offered them and students have taken them up. Our hope when they were announced on Easter Sunday was that we would see 20,000 additional students take up these short courses, and we think we're on track to reach that number. So it shows that the demand is there, and we want to keep working with the sector to make sure, especially in those areas where we know there are skills shortages, we will be able to provide those additional— The Minister will resume his seat or just take a seat for a second. The member for Indi on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. I have asked, will the Minister consider funding more places?
Just call the Minister, and whilst the question did have a preamble, there was a specific element to it, and I invite the Minister to address himself.
Mr Speaker. Just so I'm very clear, so they were additional places for those short courses, so that's what I was talking about. When it comes to performance-based funding, they're additional courses, so that's what I was talking about. We're also offering additional courses through the regional university centres. And as you know, we made a further announcement about those regional university centres last week, 9 new regional university centres. That takes to 25 the number of regional university centres now rolled out across the nation. Each one of those brings additional places with it, and as the member knows, we're working with her community in Wangaratta to put in place a regional university centre there. Now, we do know due to the counter-cyclical nature of unemployment, that we're going to see additional demand come into the system over the coming months. And so this is something that I am in discussions with the university sector on right now to see how working together with that additional demand that's going to come into the sector as a result of COVID-19 and the impact that it's had on the employment market, so that there will be ability for those people who want to go to higher education to go to higher education, those people who want to go to vocational education to do that, and hopefully, if we can keep the confidence in our economy, enabling those people who want to go into the job market to go into the job market.
Concluded. The member for McKellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline for the House what the Morrison government is doing to assist older Australians and those planning for their retirement during this pandemic? Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for McKellar for his question and acknowledge his extensive background in small business and the health sector and also financial services sector before coming to this place. Now, Mr Speaker, Australians are doing it tough in this one-in-a-century pandemic, and particularly older Australians, those who are either in retirement or planning for retirement. And that's why the Morrison government has acted, Mr Speaker, with $750 cash payments, one that started on the 31st of March and the other to come in July, that have been supporting more than 2 million pensioners. We've also reduced the drawdown rates by 50%, Mr Speaker, to give retirees more control over their savings. And we've also reduced the deeming rates by 0.75%, so at the lower level they're at 0.25%, Mr Speaker. So with these measures, the Council of the Ageing has welcomed these measures and said that the government is helping to get senior Australians through this crisis. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm asked about any alternative policies, Mr Speaker. Well, I know that the member for Rankin was the architect of $387 billion of higher taxes, Mr Speaker. Do you remember those higher taxes? The one the member for McMahon said if you don't like them, don't vote for them, Mr Speaker. $387 billion of higher taxes that the member for Rankin, who keeps his head down, said he was pleased and proud of. He was so pleased. Do you remember that photo? You know that photo on the eve of the election? Under the heading, "We're ready," under the heading, "We're ready" there. Now, Mr Speaker, you could ask yourself, how did senior Australians fare out of those taxes, Mr Speaker? How did senior Australians fare with those taxes? Well, Mr Speaker, there were $34 billion of extra taxes on super, Mr Speaker. There was $31 billion of extra taxes on housing, and there was a $57 billion retirees tax, Mr Speaker, that would hit some 1 million Australians, including around 7,000 in Eden Monero, Mr Speaker, and would leave one of those Australians on average $2,200 a year worse off. It would heavily hit women and would heavily hit lower income earners, Mr Speaker, and that the Alliance for a Fairer Retirement System said Labor's policy was a cruel blow, the end result which would be to drive many retirees onto welfare. Now, Mr Speaker, I read today that the member for Rankin is blaming the media for his irrelevance, Mr Speaker. Well, how delusional and desperate can you get? He hasn't asked me a question all last week, and he hasn't asked me a question this week, Mr Speaker. The member for Rankin has his eyes on only one job that he can't even do his.
The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I have in my hand an AusTender contract notice which reveals that during the bushfire crisis the government entered into a contract for, and I quote, "Global Sentiment Monitor Australian Bushfires," costing taxpayers $293,000. Why is the government spending money monitoring what the world thinks about our bushfires?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'd be happy to take the information that the Leader of the Opposition has and come back to him on this matter. I'm happy for him to provide that to him, Mr Speaker. I do recall at the time one of the concerns, particularly of our tourism industry at that point, was their worries about how Australia was being perceived, and they had very real fears that at that time, and that was pre-COVID, that people might cancel their holidays to Australia. Now, I must say, at the time when I was talking to various global leaders at that time, there was quite an inaccurate picture of the extent of where the fires were across Australia at that time, and that was causing very real concern about international bookings into Australia, particularly in places like Western Australia and parts of Western Victoria and along the Great Ocean Road and the Northern Territory. So I'm happy to look at the specific issue that the opposition leader has raised, but I can say on the broader issue of understanding what global perceptions were at that time, there was a concern in the government and there was a concern in the tourism industry about how we could be tasking our missions overseas to be addressing any misperceptions about those arrangements to ensure that the terrible damage that was being caused by the bushfires was not made worse by misinformation being in the global domain.
Members on my left. The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government's investment in essential services is supporting women's economic and physical security in response to the coronavirus pandemic?
The Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Lindsay for her question. And as someone who led an international initiative on women's economic empowerment before coming to this place, she is in a terrific position to support her community at this time. And I know that she would understand really well that the choices women make for themselves, for and with their families in the workplace are all optimised by a strong and resilient economy. Women are indeed making a significant contribution to our COVID-19 response and recovery. Women are on the front lines, making up the majority of employees in essential services like health, education, aged care, disability services. Prior to COVID-19, women's full-time employment and female participation reached record highs, and we will absolutely continue our focus on our $158 million Women's Economic Security Plan, which we were the first to introduce and which the Prime Minister said earlier this week will get a refresh. Women have been the hardest hit through COVID-19. Our participation figures show that 325,000 women have lost their jobs.
Members on my left.
And the women's workforce participation rate has fallen 2.9 percentage points to 58.4 percentage points. And this is partly due to the fact, of course, that women are heavily represented in sectors with sharp decreases in paid work, hospitality, tourism and retail. We know that increasing women's participation in paid employment will assist in accelerating Australia's overall recovery. Our record investments are supporting women and men, households and businesses through COVID-19. Half of all JobKeeper payments are going to female workers, and it's been a lifeline for female-run businesses, like Kerry Haskew in my electorate of Farrer, who runs a small business, a lingerie business in City Walk in Albury. And she wrote to me to say that she really appreciated the relatively quick and easy way she was able to get support through JobKeeper. Kerry doesn't want a continual handout. She wants her business open. It opened on the 1st of June. She wants people walking in the door. She loves her elderly customers. She wants shoppers in the streets. And she knows that this government has been there when she needed it. Now, we saw some welcome news today. ABS payrolls data show the number of females in jobs increased 1.4% through May. And we've got more work to do, but it's a really encouraging start. Outside the workplace, unfortunately, the pandemic has meant domestic violence rates have increased, and we are still working hard. The support that we added during the crisis, our domestic violence initiatives, our information campaign, whether it be women's safety, participation in the workforce, financial security, we want to see every woman empowered to make for themselves and their families the choices that a strong, resilient economy will allow.
Concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Bushfire Recovery Agency admits that months and months after bushfires ripped through snowy Monaro, not one out of 119 bushfire-affected properties has been cleared of debris. Why is this Prime Minister spending money on marketing instead of bushfire survivors?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And obviously the properties that were damaged across Eden Monaro is something that we've worked with the New South Wales Government in making sure that the clean-up is taken as quickly as we possibly can. You have to appreciate there is some complexity. You have to understand there's some complexity around the clean-up in that some of those buildings contain asbestos. Now, it also took time in which to be able to get personnel into those areas to make assessments about whether there was asbestos and when the fires had actually been, there were safe trees had been fallen so that they could get people in safely. You cannot put other Australians in harm's way. These are professional men and women who make these assessments, and they are held by the state governments who pay them to make sure that they keep all of us safe. And the New South Wales Government has done that, and in fact they have made a commitment to have all homes in New South Wales cleaned up by the end of July. And in Eden Monaro, let me tell you what the numbers are as of the 16th of June. In the Snowy Valley LGA, 188 homes have been cleared out of 208. In Snowy Monaro, 11 out of 31. In Queanbeyan, 48 out of 64. In the Bega Valley, 375 out of 431. In Eurobodalla, 570 out of 610. So the New South Wales Government, which we made a commitment to pay half the bill, engaged a contractor to go and undertake this in a professional way that kept everybody safe and got people back into the recovery of their lives that have been uprooted by this fire. This is a complex program, and I have to congratulate the New South Wales Government in being able to do this in a professional way and as quickly as they possibly can. South Australia is in fact completed. Victoria will not be complete until the end of August. All this data we make sure is available on the National Bushfire Recovery Agency website. There is full transparency to make sure that everyone understands the progress of every program in which the federal government runs itself or we ask the state governments to run on our behalf. We are working collaboratively together. As I say, we're not going to blame the states. We're going to work with the states because this is above politics. This is about people.
The Manager of Opposition Business seeking the call.
Yeah, on tabling of a document. The minister just quoted from a document that provided different numbers to those that the government has otherwise provided, and I'd ask him to table it.
Was the minister quoting from a confidential document? The minister was quoting from a confidential document. All I can do is ask the minister if he was tabling, if he's reading from a confidential document. He said that he was, so I take the minister at his word. I mean, a document can contain more than just the material that the House is after. The member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Health. Will the minister please outline to the House how the Morrison government is investing in mental health support, particularly for our youth, during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond?
The Minister for Health.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Moncrieff for her commitment to youth mental health. In particular, she's been a great advocate and supporter for the Southport Headspace, along with all of the young people on the Gold Coast. We know the challenge of youth mental health is real and profound and significant. 1 in 4 young Australians in any one year face some form of mental health challenge. Over 400 beautiful young Australians took their lives in 2018, for which we have the confirmed figures. So last year, in 2019, this was one of the central features of the budget, with an over $500 million youth mental health package put forward by the Prime Minister and the Treasurer. Going in, however, to the pandemic, we knew that more needed to be done, that the challenges that were already there required additional investment. So as part of that, the first phase of what we did was a $1.1 billion investment in primary health. In particular, there was a $74 million investment in mental health with a significant focus on youth and children's support. Kids Helpline with $2 million, $6.75 million for the work of the Head to Health youth-focused website. All of these things have been helping to make a difference. More broadly, telehealth, with now over 14 million services, has been a prime deliverer of additional mental health support to young Australians and, in fact, to all Australians. The second phase of the mental health program through COVID had a particular youth mental health focus, an over $40 million program coupled with the pandemic mental health plan, and then that led into the third phase, which was the practical research focus, $20 million investment, but half of that on suicide prevention with youth as a fundamental part. But going forwards, we also have more work to do. It's something that every member of this House believes in and is passionate about. It's part of our fundamental responsibility. In that context, I'm delighted that in the last week we were able to announce an additional $24 million for Headspace to expand services in headspaces around the country. We currently provide approximately $120 million a year for Headspace, but this is to provide the additional services for young people in their teens and early 20s. For over 40 different headspaces, one of which I had the privilege of visiting was the Queanbeyan headspace, where Tiana was there and able to talk about the way in which it's been able to transform her life and her experience. And the investment we're making there is similar to the investment we're making in over 40 headspaces. It's about hope and opportunity and recovery.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why are all the media and communications positions at the National Bushfire Recovery Agency filled, but the 3 local economic recovery positions are still vacant? Why is the Prime Minister focused on marketing instead of delivering for bushfire survivors?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Well, can I just say the local economic recovery plans start on the 1st of July. This has been about making sure that the commitment of additional
members on my left, the member for Griffith.
Well, I'll answer the question. They start on the 1st of July because it's very important that we engage with the community and made sure that we did it region by region. So it took time to bring the community together, to bring those civic leaders together, because we didn't want a Canberra-led recovery. We didn't want, on those on the other side would like to see that it's all centralised from here. We wanted engagement with the local community. And so, therefore, the commitment about the rebuilding of those communities will be important, community by community. In terms of having media people within the National Bushfire Recovery Agency stood up immediately, it was important. There was important information that needed to be put out. In fact, $240 million in nearly $240 million in immediate relief was put out. It was important that message got to people. It was important that we helped the states in articulating the small business grants, the farmer grants, the concessional loans, to ensure that people understood what was available. They were going through trauma. It was important that we were able to communicate the programs that are available both centrally and on the ground. And that's why we've continued to put additional personnel from the National Bushfire Recovery Agency on the ground. This has been a multifaceted approach. And now the next phase is about recovery. It's about the local economic recovery plans, a local-led recovery, not a Canberra-led recovery, ensuring that they are empowered to make the decisions about what that recovery looks like, building back better. They should determine that, not someone from Canberra. And that's exactly the strategy that we've undertaken and will continue to undertake, because we want to build this nation back better for those that have been impacted. And this is what it's all about, calmly and methodically working through, ensuring that that $2 billion in additional support will get out there. In fact, we said we'd only be able to have $500 million out by the 30th of June, but we will have $1 billion of the $2 billion fund out by the 30th of June. That's because we've been able to communicate with those that need it the most, getting it out of our pocket and into their pockets. That's exactly what you should do in this recovery, is look after them. And we've done that calmly and methodically, and we say to those opposite,
We are open and transparent, happy to work through any issue you may have. This is more about politics. More than about politics, this is about people.
The member for Curtin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications, Cyber Safety and the Arts. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government is protecting children online during the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly as they return to school?
The Minister for Communications.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member for Curtin for her question. Of course, as a former Vice-Chancellor of one of our leading universities, she has a long-standing commitment to the welfare of young Australians, and so it's a very appropriate question for her to be asking. And of course, what we have seen through the COVID-19 pandemic is very high usage of the internet by children and by adults. And of course, the internet is an extraordinarily valuable resource, but sadly a percentage of human interactions online, just as offline, are not positive ones. And that's why it's very important that we have the e-Safety Commissioner there to protect Australians, and particularly children, against some of the risks that they may encounter online. And indeed, our government took the lead in establishing what was first called the Children's E-Safety Commissioner in 2015, before its responsibilities were expanded, and one of the leading governments around the world in making sure that there was an agency there to protect Australians. The E-Safety Commissioner funded with $90 million over the next 4 years, and what we've seen, Mr Speaker, over this period is traffic to the website of the E-Safety Commissioner, esafety.gov.au, has doubled over this period as Australians, and particularly children, parents, carers, teachers, come forward seeking practical advice and assistance. Indeed, more than 28,000 people have registered for one of eSafety's free webinars since mid-March. Now, very importantly, the E-Safety Commissioner has the power to intervene if a child is the subject of cyberbullying. The E-Safety Commissioner has the power to take action where people are the victim of image-based abuse. And I'm sorry to say that we have seen a 200% increase in reports of image-based abuse coming to the E-Safety Commissioner during the period of the COVID-19 pandemic, with more people at home, more people online. We've seen an 80% increase in reports of child sexual abuse content, I'm very sorry to report to the House. And as children are returning to school, we have also seen an increase in complaints about cyberbullying, up 128% on last year. If you are experiencing cyberbullying or one of these other adverse online consequences, please go to esafety.gov.au. It has the capacity to get this stuff taken down, in some instances in as short a period as 30 minutes. And the E-Safety Commissioner has a range of useful tools and resources, more being added all the time, including, and the member will be interested to know this, the E-Safety Toolkit for Universities recently released 3,600 visits to look at various aspects of that toolkit in the first few days since it's been released.
The member for Kingston.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. When it comes to slashing mail deliveries, the Prime Minister says pandemic measures will last until the middle of next year. So why is he kicking childcare workers off JobKeeper in July?
To the Prime Minister.
The Minister for Education, to further respond to this question. What we are doing is providing additional support, Mr Speaker, to childcare operators. More than $700 million of support in addition to the rebates that are received by childcare operators, so they can support more workers, not less, Mr Speaker. And that has occurred as a result of the consultations undertaken by the Minister for Education. Mr Speaker, this government not only stepped in to provide childcare support by offering free childcare when the childcare sector was dropping like a stone, Mr Speaker, in relation to the COVID crisis. We stepped in, we acted, we have worked with the sector and have provided that additional subsidy support as they transition back to their operations in the future. We've stepped in, we're providing the support, we've worked with the sector, Mr Speaker. Those opposite seek to make hay over a crisis, and they should be ashamed of themselves. I'll ask the Minister for Education.
The member for Kingston will cease interjecting. The Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the Prime Minister? And I would just remind the House that we put in place temporary measures to help the childcare sector when demand was dropping. And can I say on behalf of the government, and I think this would be on behalf of all members of the House, to all those early childhood educators who worked through the pandemic, 99% of childcare services remained open through the pandemic. Now, if you have a look what happened right across the world, we are unique in this regard, and I thank all those early childhood educators who worked through the pandemic. They provided much-needed services to those essential services workers, and in particular to the vulnerable children who needed care. But what we put in place was temporary measures for when demand was dropping. We have now put in place transition arrangements to support the sector as demand comes back into it, and it has reached 74%. And what we did with regards to the employment guarantee that we put in place and the transition payment of $708 million that the Prime Minister mentioned, what that means now is 200,000 employees are supported rather than the 120,000 employees who were supported under the temporary measures that we put in place. One was there for when demand was dropping. We've now put in place new arrangements. As demand increases, we will continue to work with the sector. We will continue to consult with the sector. But can I once again commend the sector for the outstanding job they did in making sure they were there to provide the care we needed. 99%
the Minister's
of
time
services
has concluded. I call the member for Braddon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the Minister update the House on steps the Morrison government is taking to protect Australian children from exploitation and abuse? And is the Minister aware of alternative approaches?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, as I've reported to the House before, the government really has made it an absolute priority to make sure that we can protect Australian children. And one of the ways that we're doing that is to invest significantly into the Australian Federal Police, the other agencies within Home Affairs, to work very closely with their police colleagues around the states. And we have been involved now in a number of operations where a record number of pedophiles have been arrested. Mr Speaker, you can imagine the devastation of the police, the investigators, but most importantly the victims, their mums and dads, their family members, when those offenders go to court and in many cases receive no jail time at all. And the government has spoken to a lot of victims groups, spoken to a lot of individual police officers about how this work has scarred their lives, in many cases forever, and all of them say to us, please do whatever you can to increase the jail time for those sex offenders. And so the government was shocked last night in the Senate when the Labor Party opposed the bill that we had put in place. When the Labor Party, Mr Speaker,
Minister will
went
resume his
completely
seat.
back.
The Minister will resume his seat. The Minister will resume his seat. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The member for Mitchell will cease interjecting. I'm going to call the Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order, and then I'm just going to, for the convenience and interest of the House, say a couple of things myself. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On a point of order, Mr Speaker, on reflections on members, claiming that members voted in a different way to how they did is both dishonest in the House and disorderly, and the minister should withdraw and should not be allowed to continue with an answer that he knows is not true.
On the point of order, I'm just going to say to members, this is obviously difficult ground, and I've ruled on matters before and made clear what the rules are. I don't expect every member to necessarily remember that, but members need to tread very carefully. The Minister, on a point of order.
On a point of order, Mr Speaker, and it goes to the contribution just made by the honourable member opposite. The statement that he made was incorrect. The comments he made in relation to me were false, and I would ask you to ask him to withdraw those comments.
I'm just going to say, can I just say those members behind the Leader of the Opposition, they're not helping anyone, including their leadership, when they interject like this. I need to deal with what's a very serious matter, and all they do is hinder the performance of the House. And can I say that's not what they were elected to do. What I'm going to say to the Manager of I'm going to say two things to the Manager of Opposition Business and to the Minister for Home Affairs. It is well established that when it comes to questions and answers, the chair is not in a capacity to judge the accuracy. I mean, I'd be suspending the House and going and checking on facts and figures all day. That is why personal explanations are allowed at the end of question time. But I'm going to say very clearly that reflections on members and imputing motives, there is no tolerance for within the practice, and I'm just saying that as a piece of information that is very, very important. So both the Manager of Opposition Business and the Minister can have their personal explanations at the end of question time if they so wish, and we'll deal with that then. In the meantime, I'll listen to the Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the Senate last night, the government sought to introduce legislation which was not supported by the Leader of the Opposition or the Labor Party. That is the truth, Mr Speaker. We wanted to introduce minimum mandatory sentencing for pedophiles, and you opposed it. You opposed it, and you were captured by the Daily Tally today. That's the reality,
Minister
Mr.
knows
Speaker.
the rules on props.
And, Mr Speaker, the government is as offended as parents are around the country, Mr Speaker, because the Leader of the Opposition stood in here last week and said that he would assist us in relation to these matters in any way he could, and yet this week he demonstrates, Mr Speaker, that he will not support us on these very important matters. Now, Labor says that it's a principal issue for them, that they won't support any mandatory sentencing. The fact is, Mr Speaker, the Labor Party has supported mandatory sentencing before
Members for Isaacs
in relation
and
to terrorism-related offences. They have supported mandatory sentencing in relation to offending of. They have supported in Victoria, Mr Speaker, mandatory sentencing for people that commit offences, assaults against emergency services workers, and they have supported mandatory sentencing in relation to people smuggling offences as well, Mr Speaker. So I would just say, Mr Speaker, that the Leader of the Opposition needs to reconsider his position. We are all absolutely committed to seeing the original bill, with its original intent, gone back into the Senate and supported, Mr Speaker, where the Labor Party last night did not. Now, Mr Speaker, this came yesterday on a day of great shame for the Australian Labor Party, where Mr Orkopoulos again, Mr Speaker, was charged with offences, and all I would say, Mr Speaker, is think of those victims when you make these dreadful
The Minister's
decisions.
time has concluded. The member for Maribyrnong.
You lost control of your senators. That was the problem. You got rolled by Draper.
The Minister will cease interjecting. The member for Maribyrnong has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. In March 2017, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal found there was no legal basis for the method used by the government to raise robo-debts. When did the minister know robo-debt was illegal?
The Minister for Government Services has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank the member for his question. As I've said previously in the House, and as the Ombudsman report accurately reflects, the use of income averaging to raise debts has been a long-standing practice of governments. Indeed, so long-standing that in 2009,
for 16% of debts raised in that year from a sample of 500 were using solely or partially income averaging, and in 2011 that jumped up to 24% of debts raised that year wholly or partially from income averaging. That's been done from a sample of 500, which just demonstrates the long-standing nature of how this practice has been going. And those ministers in 2009, 2011...
Just before I recognise the member for Maribyrnong, I was just about to intervene myself and say, as I've said to the minister before, he's entitled to a preamble, but that's now approaching a minute, and the question was very tight. It had a statement of fact that was necessary for the specific question, and there was no commentary or debate in the matter. So, as I said, the minister is entitled to a preamble, but he now needs to bring himself to the specifics of the question or wind up his answer. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And since it was such a long-standing practice to use averaged income data from the ATO, as soon as I was informed, I moved expeditiously to halt the program. I announced that on the 19th of November last year. I did a press conference to say that I had been informed.
The member for Maribyrnong is entitled to seek the call. The member for Maribyrnong on a point of order.
Just relevance, Mr.
Hang on. Just the minister and the member for McMahon can cease their animated discussion, and I'll hear the point of order. The member for Maribyrnong.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. On the point of relevance, it was when did the minister find out it was unlawful? Not when did he decide to do something about it or tell us publicly. When did the minister know robo-debt was unlawful? It's a date, Stewie.
The member for Maribyrnong needs to refer to members by their correct titles. Those last two words were unnecessary to his point of order. No, I make the point. I make the point seriously because when the football turns over and the boot's on the other foot, people tend not to like it. Not everyone likes their nickname. The minister does need to address himself to the specifics of the question.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Wind up his answer.
As I've said last week in the House and this week in the House, as soon as I was informed, I moved expeditiously to inform the Australian people, and that date was the 19th of November.
The member for Ryan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Will the Attorney update the House on how the Morrison government is working to ensure children are protected from the abhorrent crimes of child sexual abuse, and is the Attorney aware of any alternative policies?
The Attorney-General has the call.
I thank the member for his question and for his great commitment to this area. So the Crimes Legislation Amendment, Sexual Crimes Against Children and Community Protection Bill will shortly be put to a final vote in the Senate. In fact, in its original form, that was introduced on 13 September 2017. And absolutely central to that bill, as the Minister for Home Affairs elegantly explained, is minimum mandatory penalties, the absolute central part of that bill. And why has the government never given up on minimum mandatory penalties for child sex offences? Because the type of offending it sentences is the worst of the worst. Because the instances of this type of offending are increasing. Because the Centre for Countering Child Exploitation tells us there's been a 123% increase in the average monthly reports it receives of child exploitation. Because there's clearly undeniable evidence that sentencing does not align with the community expectations and therefore doesn't provide sufficient or general specific deterrence. Last year, 39% of Commonwealth offences in this area, the offenders did not receive a single day in jail. There have been sentences like a 22-year-old who committed sexual activities online with someone they thought was a 12-year-old child, where the maximum penalty is 15 years and they received 9 months. 15 years, 9 months. Members opposite have been opposed to minimum mandatory sentencing as a matter of principle. But in assessing that, let me read this. These are the statements of Senator Penny Wong on the introduction of the mandatory minimums for people smuggling bill. She said the measures in the bill will address the often serious consequences of people smuggling. The bill will act as a greater deterrent for people smugglers. The bill is a measured response to a growing problem and demonstrates the government's commitment to addressing the serious nature of people smuggling. To assess whether or not that was a matter of principle or hypocrisy, listen to those sentences again with a slight change to the words and answer whether it now makes more or less sense. The measures in the bill will address the often serious consequences of child sex offending. The bill will act as a greater deterrent for child sex offenders. The bill is a measured response to a growing problem and demonstrates the government's commitment to addressing the serious nature of child sex offences. There is one principle here, and that is these people must spend longer inside prison.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On the 29th of May, the Prime Minister said the government has a jobs target. What is it?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We went to the last election committing to generate another 1.5 million jobs. That's what we did, Mr Speaker. We went to the election with that very commitment because, Mr Speaker, in our first 6 years, that's exactly what we achieved. We generated, through the policies that we put in place, Mr Speaker, and working with the Australian economy and the businesses that make it up and the many small and medium-sized businesses, that's what we achieved. Now, Mr Speaker, the COVID-19 crisis has wiped 30 months of job growth from the Australian economy, and that is a devastating outcome. But what the Australian people know, Mr Speaker, is that this government has already demonstrated its ability to work with businesses and employers and employees across this country to generate jobs. And they know we can do it again, Mr Speaker. And they know that's what they need. They know they need a government who knows how to create jobs. And that's what the Job Maker program is all about, Mr Speaker. And that is the program I've been outlining to the country, that indeed the Treasurer will add further to when the economic statement is released later this in July, and then of course the budget in October, Mr Speaker. This government knows how to generate jobs, Mr Speaker, and it's jobs that Australians need. And that's why we will remain committed to generating those jobs and regaining those jobs that have been taken from Australians by the COVID-19 crisis, Mr Speaker, and our government has the policies to achieve it. Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition, I had the opportunity to see a copy of the speech he was supposed to deliver on economic policy this week. I am not surprised he did not decide to deliver it, Mr Speaker, because there was nothing in it, Mr Speaker. There was nothing in it. The Leader of the Opposition's great national solution to the problems of jobs in this country is a national driver's licence. What's next? Harmonisation of shopper dockets.
I just say to the Prime Minister has moved off the policy topic.
I have, Mr Speaker, because the Leader of the Opposition is off the policy topic, and that's the economy and jobs, Mr Speaker. The economy and jobs. We will be working to restore those jobs, Mr Speaker, that have been lost and generate even more, and we will update on those targets, Mr Speaker, when we present the budget later this year. But our government has delivered jobs, and we will deliver jobs again. Our government balanced the budget again, and, Mr Speaker, we'll be putting in place the decisions to do it again, Mr Speaker. The Australian public know that we know how to run an economy, particularly at a time like this. This Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker, is shallow thin when it comes to economic policy, Mr Speaker. He has no experience on the issue of economic policy, and his shadow Treasurer has even less.
The member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Education. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is ensuring that Australian children get a quality education, including during the current pandemic?
The Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Robertson for her question. And I know that she cares deeply about the education of Australian children. It's one of her absolute passions, and it's why she's supported the government's record investment when it comes to schools, $314.2 billion to 2029. That's a 63.2% increase in funding. Mr Speaker, on Friday Education Council met and we were able to endorse some projects and some policies which will further benefit Australian children.
Member for
to
Lawler
start
has
with,
already
what
been
we're
warned.
able to do is to all agree that every student that does Year 12 this year or Year 11, where they do a VCE subject, that they will get an ATAR in 2020. So there will be no mass repeating, no Year 13. We've dealt with the pandemic and we will ensure that every Year 12 student will get an ATAR in 2020. We were also able to agree that we will set up a $50 million National Evidence Institute, a key recommendation of David Gonski's review to achieve educational excellence in Australian schools. So this is another key milestone in ensuring that when it comes to schools, that they will get the best practice, that they will get effective teaching policy given to them by an independent National Evidence Institute, which will go a long way to lifting educational outcomes in this nation. And can I thank all the state and territory education ministers for working with the Commonwealth to agree this key achievement, the establishment of this $50 million National Evidence Institute. And it will be Dr Jenny Donovan who will be the inaugural director from 1 July 2020. So not only have we set the institute up, but we have a director who will hit the ground running to make sure that this institute can put those practices in place, those policies in place, which will inform schools and in particular teachers and principals about what they can do to lift education standards in this nation and education outcomes. And we also progressed the review of the Australian curriculum. This was an election commitment of the federal government that we wanted to declutter the Australian curriculum so that focus on literacy and numeracy could be at the heart of what our children are learning at school. And this is what we've agreed, and importantly, it will be maths and science that we start with in decluttering our curriculum and making sure that that focus is there on numeracy, on science. So Education Council is endorsing our policies and our commitment to make sure we lift educational
I call the member for Gorton.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How many Australian businesses are trading insolvent and are expected to close when government support is suddenly withdrawn in September?
The Treasurer.
Well, Mr Speaker, as you know, and as the honourable member knows, that we put in place some changes to the insolvency and the bankruptcy laws to get businesses through this difficult period. But at the same time, we are doing everything possible to ensure that businesses can stay in business and Australians can stay in jobs. And the member for Gorton should know in his own electorate there are more than 4,000 people who are benefiting from the JobKeeper program, Mr Speaker. And the reality is, through our measures, we are supporting more than 800,000 businesses with the JobKeeper program. Under us, you'll see more people in a job and you'll see taxes lower.
The member for Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Will the minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is supporting the well-being of Indigenous children and their families across the nation?
The Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Mr Speaker, thank you. And I thank the member for Barara for his ongoing interest in the work we're doing in our portfolio, but more importantly for Indigenous children and families. One of the key foundations of life is the beginning journey for a child in a family environment, which consolidates the way in which the nurturing love is the basis for a great opportunity. And I want to acknowledge the member for BRADDON because she and I, many years ago, worked on a document called Solid Foundations, which went to a number of aspects of not just education, but social and emotional well-being. The elements of the way in which children were given an opportunity that gave them a better future. And the Morrison government has invested a further $243 million under the IAS Safety and Wellbeing program, which includes funding for social and emotional wellbeing support for families and youth, violence reduction and victim support for families, crime prevention, diversion and rehabilitation and reinvigoration activities, but also youth alcohol and substance prevention and treatment activities. One of the things that we need to think about in the protection of families and children is that when they experience a disruptive life in which domestic violence or sexual abuse is part of their life, it leaves an indelible scar that carries on into their future years and often is an imposition to their success within their journey on life. It impacts on their education. And so the interventions that we're putting into place is being done in working with community, working with our women who are our leaders in so many fronts in health and education and family violence, but also with our men to take their place in the protective role that they also have to carry and be involved in. If we are to change the dynamics, then it's important that all of us in this chamber build on those strategies. And Mr Speaker, we're focused every single day on getting more children to school, reducing suicide rates, which is a scourge on our communities, creating jobs and economic opportunities for all Indigenous Australians, because all of those have flow-on effects that will make a difference, and we are succeeding. Successive governments have built success. We should celebrate success, not always focus on the gap. Whilst the new report for closing the gap has significant targets, we must celebrate every achievement, because by celebrating achievement, we will give people the opportunity and aspiration for a better future. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
And the Leader of the Opposition has indicated he wishes to rise on indulgence.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I want to associate the Labor Party with the comments of the Minister. The truth is that we as a parliament, all sides have failed on these issues in the past. We need to do much better, and we need to work together wherever possible to achieve better outcomes and indeed celebrate the wins that are here. There are two wins sitting here in this chamber: the fact that the Minister and the Shadow Minister are the first Indigenous Australians, respectively, to hold their positions.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Adding to an answer, or I can seek further questions to be placed on notice, whichever order you prefer.
That doesn't bother me.
Okay, Mr Speaker, just adding to an answer in relation to the matter that was raised by the Leader of the Opposition, and I thank you for his comments on indulgence just now on that other matter. Mr Speaker, the Austrade initiated the contract that he referred to assess the reputational impact on Australia as a result of the bushfires. It was part of a broader allocation to DFAT at their request to counter negative sentiment that could damage Australia's economy. It was a package that was presented and recommended to the government by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Mr Speaker, the imputation in the Leader of the Opposition's question was to suggest that this was some sort of consumer marketing exercise. That is a false assertion. This was responding to the very careful advice provided by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. We were responding to what was very important advice at a very critical time for Australian businesses, and I ask that further questions be placed on the notice plate.